This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
At least 7 dead and dozens injured in Pakistan after a bomb blast near a religious school. Sudan's Sovereign Council leader defends deal to normalize relations with Israel. And double trouble, what life is like for a woman with cancer and COVID-19. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories coming up this hour. The European Union backs Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to lead the World Trade Organization. And in sports, South Sudan looking to reopen Juba National Stadium after minor collapse. We start in northwestern Pakistan, where at least 7 people have been killed after a bomb blast hit a religious school. The explosion has left dozens injured in Peshawar city. Most of the victims were children. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Police say the bomb was planted in a plastic bag which contained up to 6 kilograms of explosives. The military leader of Sudan's ruling council has been defending a US-backed agreement to establish relations with Israel. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said the deal, which is yet to be concluded, could lift Sudan out of an economic crisis. The government is currently battling with rapid inflation, a weakening currency and shortage of essential goods. Last week's confirmation by the US to remove Khartoum from its list of state sponsors of terrorism comes as some relief. For decades, the listing has blocked Sudan from accessing international funding and debt relief. However, the US deal has stirred opposition among prominent political factions, with Sudan once considered a staunch enemy of Israel. General Burhan said he consulted most political forces before the agreement was announced last week.
When we talk about removing sanctions from Sudan, we cannot only talk about normalization with Israel. I always prefer to call it reconciliation instead of normalization, because we're now making a reconciliation deal. And reconciliation is a legitimate move for all sides, especially when it benefits both parties. We have included all negotiating parties, even at the level of the Sovereign Council, before the joint three-way statement. I suggested this in case anyone had any different views. We will sign with the other 2 parties, who are the US and Israel, on the aspects of cooperation, which will start after the signing of the deal. We were not subjected to blackmail. We laid down our interests to see if we would benefit from this, and we found benefits. And it could be that we gain more than the other parties.
In Mali, Prime Minister Mokhtar Wane says he is open to talks with Islamist militants whose insurgency has made vast swaths of the country ungovernable. But former colonial power France has signaled opposition to the idea, noting that Islamist groups had not signed a 2015 peace deal that it considers a framework for restoring peace to northern Mali. Earlier this year, the now ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta was prepared to negotiate with al-Qaeda-linked militants, but those talks were disrupted by protests which saw the overthrow of Keïta. Now, the leaders of the 18-month transition are endorsing the policy for formal negotiations.
On this question, it is useful to repeat the conclusions on the national inclusive talks that took place here at home, and which clearly indicated the need to offer dialogue with these armed groups. And I think we must see this as an opportunity to engage in far-reaching talks with the communities in order to redefine the contours of a new governance in the concerned spaces. That is a demand for which we must all think together, and will require, and I think I need to say it, and underline it, and I think our partners are conscious on this, it requires a sequencing and coordination with our partners, more specifically, those who intervene militarily in our country.
Like you, I have read the declaration of the Secretary General of the United Nations, but I read it in full, if it doesn't bother for me to read it out. We need a global vision for Sahel, There will be groups with whom we will be able to talk and who have an interest in engaging in this dialogue in order to become the political actors of the future. But there remains those whose terrorist radicalism is such that we will have nothing to do with them. That is the Secretary General of the United Nations in the same declaration.
Let's take you back to Sudan, where the military leader of the ruling council has been defending a U.S.-backed agreement to establish relations with Israel. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said the deal, which is yet to be concluded, could lift Sudan out of an economic crisis. Let's discuss this further with Amira El Sayed. She is a political analyst and editor at the Egyptian Gazette. Amira, thank you very much for joining us. The move to normalize ties between these two countries, Sudan and Israel, has not been received positively by everyone in Sudan. Why are some people opposed to this?
Look, definitely Sudan's decision to normalize ties with Israel is still very controversial and draws mixed reactions and heated debate in Sudan. You know that Sudan has always been known as a major opponent and foe to Israel since the latter's founding in 1948. You know that Khartoum was the site of the declaration against normalizing ties with Israel, and you know, in the famous Arab League summit in 1967, 3 no's were approved: no normalization with Israel, no peace with Israel, and no negotiation with Israel. And now these 3 no's now has turned into 3 yeses. So definitely steering like public controversy was very expected. Now the political dynamics has changed in Sudan following the overthrow of the long-time ruler Omar al-Bashir and its replacement with the transitional civilian military government. You know, the officials in Sudan, they wanted to revive the Sudanese economy. They wanted to be lifted from the state sponsors of terrorism list, so because the sanctions had undermine Sudan's ability to receive funds and investment. So they want to breathe new life into Sudan's economy. And many people think that Sudan was under stress and it was forced to sign the deal to be removed from this list. And actually we have seen that also Sudan has paid $335 million to be removed from the list. And the Sudanese Prime Minister Hamidok said that we are working on international relations that will serve peace the Sudanese people. So definitely there are mixed reactions in Sudan regarding normalizing ties with Israel. Yeah.
Okay, and so now Sudan has joined the list of a few other Arab countries that have normalized relations with Israel. This is an issue that has also left the Arab League divided. Do you see any possible middle ground on this for the Arab League?
Look, the Arab League is now also if you can say, it's now under fire, because especially in September when Palestine resigned from the chairmanship of the Arab League meetings, because according to Palestinian Foreign Minister El-Malki, he said that signing peace deals with Israel is dishonorable and they cannot lead the Arab League while there is regression in values and principles. So now we can say that the Arab League is very in difficult situation in order to if you can say, to convince Palestinians or even the public opinion in the Arab region with the outcomes of normalizing ties with Israel. If we go back in time, we can refer to the Arab Peace Initiative that was endorsed by the Arab League in 2002. And according to this peace initiative, there is a proposal to normalize ties with Israel, but in return for the full withdrawal from the occupied territories, including Gaza and the West Bank. So that's why the Arab League is now being criticized for accepting normalizing ties with Israel without withdrawal while the West Bank is still under occupation. And also what have made this situation is more difficult, that yesterday the U.S. envoy or ambassador to the United Nations said that the Arab Peace Initiative now is no longer necessary, because now the peace plan that is launched and adopted by President Trump can be used as a base to resolve the conflict in the region, and it opens horizons for Palestinians. So normalizing ties with Israel can be seen as a blow to the efforts of Palestinians to have a free independent state. So it's difficult, it's really difficult for the Arab League so far far to find a middle ground. But we have to wait and see what will happen in the upcoming period.
All right, Amira, we appreciate those insights. Thank you very much. Amira El Sayed live for us in Cairo. Now, the Egyptian Serum and Vaccinations public arm, Vaxera, is leading the nation's first Phase 3 clinical trials for a COVID-19 vaccine. Egypt and 3 other Arab countries are participating in expanding trials that target 45,000 participants to test 2 Chinese-made vaccines. CGTN's Adel Mahroui speaks to Dr. Heba Wali, the chairperson of the board of directors at Vaxera, about the trials and the company's future.
This is the first clinical trial for Egypt to hold. And for Vaxera specifically to supervise. How significant is this step for the country and for the pharmaceutical industry?
It is very significant for Vaxera, for the country. It is very significant for the humanity because we're talking about Phase 3 for clinical trial for a novel vaccine. It's going to encourage all the company which is producing the vaccine, pharmaceutical, to come to Egypt to start participating in such a clinical trial, because now we had an experience. This site had been audited by the Chinese company, had been audited by the Egyptian authority, and they approved it as a site for clinical trial. Very important point that we cannot able to participate in any clinical trial unless the site to be approved by the authorities.
What is your target for these COVID-19 trials? Is there like a time frame or a specific number of participants to be achieved?
Because now we had a crisis, we need to have a fast vaccination. So the Chinese people, they took a decision before finishing Phase 3, they use it on emergency use, or they give an approval for using the vaccine on emergency use. They have a level of confidence that the vaccine is safe. Now we extend the number of volunteers, so give more confidence on the quality of the vaccine. So that's why they took a decision to use it on emergency use, not only in China, but also in Emirates. After we had a green light, or we had a clear significance of the titer for the antibodies. So when we complete the 6,000, and each one take 2 doses, and 45 days had been passed, so they can able to collect some data, and I think we can take a decision to make it on emergency use.
Vaxera is the government's biggest and maybe the only main arm for giving vaccinations in general. For the country to be depending largely on Vaxera, definitely you must have expansion plans. So what is the vision to expand your services to the public?
Vaxera is the oldest institute for the production of vaccine, not only in Egypt, but in the Middle East area and African countries. We have another one in South Africa. We can consider it's the house of vaccine. We're responsible for the vaccine for Ministry of Health, the vaccine for traveler, for military. So Vaxera is the largest, and it is the arm for the government for the vaccine, not only on a source of vaccination place, but also as a manufacturer of the vaccine. We had locally produced the insulin. We produce many types of anti-sera, for example, anti-snake, anti-scorpion sera. We have about 14 branches all over Egypt, and now we had expansion plan for the Upper Egypt because we are not there. We start to make a new places for us, new center for vaccination in Upper Egypt. So this is our future plan. Maybe inshallah will be by 2021 will be, I think, about more than 6 or 7 new vaccination centers.
In another development, negotiations between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan over the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam are resuming today. The 3 parties have been at odds over the filling and operation of the controversial dam. The resumption of talks comes 2 days after Ethiopia summoned the U.S. ambassador over what it called an incitement of war between Addis Ababa and Cairo. Meanwhile, Sudan's military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is in Cairo today to meet the Egyptian president, Egypt's intelligence chief and other officials. The dam issue is expected to be on the agenda. Now, correspondent Adel Mahroui is in Cairo for us, keeping an eye on the visit by the Sudanese leader. We also have with us CGTN's Girum Chala in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Let's start with you, Adel. Even as the 2 leaders meet today, how would you characterize Egypt and Sudan's interests at this stage as regards the Grand Renaissance Dam dispute?
The fate of Egypt and Sudan is equal in terms and the effect that they are worried and concerned about from the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam. Throughout the negotiations, despite some minor differences in their points of view, but the general philosophy and the general concept for them is to guarantee a legal binding agreement between them and Ethiopia, and that they also want to put a dispute mechanism so that they can make sure that their water share will not be affected, and if anything happens, any sort of differences between the three countries happens, they have already a set agenda and a set political or legal way to pursue, which all the three countries are agreeing upon before. Both of them are concerned about the shortage that could happen from the Grand Renaissance Dam to their shares of water. Of course, by geography, Sudan's impact from the dam would be much less than Egypt, as it can manage to take its water share first as the water passes through it, then goes to Egypt. But overall, they are both insisting on pursuing peaceful talks with Ethiopia. They want to reach a unanimous deal, and they want to see guarantees written on paper to make sure that the impact of the dam would not by any means harm them or affect their countries negatively.
Girum, a resumption of the talks happening today, what remains to be dealt with from Ethiopia's standpoint?
Peninah, the tripartite meeting between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan over the Grand Renaissance Dam has been, evolving through time with, of course, little to achieve in those several meetings held. And this time around, we have heard from the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry that the talks will revolve around the technical issues and legal issues at the same time. But to just make something clear here, the interest from the Sudanese side and the Egyptian side on this Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is highly different. Why? Because Sudanese are saying that the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is important for their development as well. As you've seen, perhaps in the last 2 months, Sudan has been flooded, despite the fact that Ethiopia has started the first phase of filling of the Grand Renaissance Dam. So if the dam can regulate the water for Sudan, it's a big deal for them. They can also find better land for the irrigation works and other things. And they see the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, this is according to several Sudanese press statements and also standpoints, that they need the Grand Renaissance Dam as part of their development. But then again, it should not harm them, as Adel said earlier. But from the Egyptian side, it looks like it's a bit tougher than this. It's more or less just involved in the management side of it. How about we are always consulted about it? And Ethiopia, and according to the foreign minister himself, Ethiopia is building this dam on its own, and no one should be consulted in this regard. But then again, there is no plan of harming any country, including Sudan and Egypt. We are here to talk about it, including this meeting happening today, to resolve their differences so that the peaceful negotiations can result in something tangible, which will lead to regional development, not only the development of Ethiopian nationals.
And Girum, what's the progress of the dam?
Well, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the largest hydroelectric power dam in Africa, and also one of the 10 top in the world when it's completed in 2022, is now close to 80% completed, Peninah. And right next year, after the filling of the first part completed, which is already done, by the way, Ethiopia is planning to start the first phase of power production. This is going to be a game changer. And by the way, 24 hours and 7 days a week, the construction of the dam is going on at the moment. And as I was saying earlier, the financing is coming from Ethiopia and Ethiopians themselves. And the dam's construction is being expedited. The Prime Minister of the country, Abiy Ahmed, is following it up every single day, including the Water and Irrigation Minister himself. Every Ethiopian, since President Donald Trump made that statement, I can tell you that on the streets of the country that we're trying to speak to people, they are saying that now, more than any other time, we're going to support the dam, and we'll see the completion of it as soon as possible. And of course, we don't want to affect our Egyptian brothers and sisters and Sudanese brothers and sisters, but we'll complete it and add as a value for African continental development. Peninah.
All right, so Adil, coming back to you, the Sovereign Council leader is also keen on another matter. The normalization of relations with Israel has been making headlines. What has been Egypt's position on this, and what should we expect?
Egypt and Sudan have been lately moving intensively to boost the economic relations between both of them. There has been already a plan to connect the electric power grids between Egypt and Sudan so that Egypt can export electricity to Sudan. They're talking about having a joint railroad systems to connect both Sudan's and Egypt's railroad as well, to expand massively in goods and people's travel between both countries, which should be a very good side for the economies as neighbors, of course. They will be also discussing, Al-Burhan will be discussing with the Egyptian president the latest development happening in the current transition. This is, by the way, the first visit for Al-Burhan to Cairo since the normalization of ties with Israel. So that will also be a key issue. Egypt has initially welcomed the move, and it has been a vocal supporter to Sudan's peace agreement and normalizing of ties with Israel. There will be also, of course, the coordination for the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, and this is basically, the talks are ongoing right now. We have as Gir mentioned, the three states have the foreign and irrigation ministers from the three countries meeting together, and both Egypt and Sudan are trying to change the approach to have a different result, because for years they have been pursuing the same motion or a level of negotiations or approach of negotiations with Ethiopia, and now, as we all see, it has not reached anywhere. So what they want now is to somehow coordinate so that they can get written guarantees from Ethiopia about the no harm policy and the management of the dam, so that they can guarantee no effects. There are very positive feedback from Egypt and Sudan regarding the Ethiopian administration. They have been insisting that peaceful negotiations is the key, but now what they want is to have a written agreement so that for the next administration that comes in Ethiopia, there would not be a change of heart. For example, this with a treaty or a final agreement with all the articles written can guarantee this peaceful management of the dam for Ethiopia with no harm guaranteed for Egypt and Sudan.
All right, Adil, thank you for that. Adil Mahri live in Cairo. We also had Grim Chela live in Addis Ababa. You're watching Africa Live. We're taking a short break. We'll be right back.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
As Americans prepare for the election, the United States is seeing a surge in hospitalizations from the coronavirus. The death toll has topped 225,000, with more than 8.8 million confirmed cases. But President Trump claims doctors are overreporting COVID-19 deaths for financial gain. He spoke at a rally in Wisconsin over the weekend, sparking fury among doctors. Jim Spellman reports from Maryland.
Across much of Europe and the UK, COVID-19 cases are skyrocketing, with new restrictions being put in place to slow the spread. In the U.S., new cases hit record levels. Public health officials fear in-person voting in the presidential election could further spread the virus, and there are long lines for testing in hard-hit states like Wisconsin. Hospitalizations are also rising, stretching resources to the max in some areas.
We've had significant spikes to the point that our hospital capacity is really tapped. We're probably at the end of our rope there.
Public health officials are particularly worried about vulnerable seniors in nursing homes.
We're concerned that we're going to see spread among other long-term care facilities. We've seen it before.
On the campaign trail, President Trump continues to downplay the pandemic, while the White House tries to clean up comments from Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who on Sunday appeared to say the Trump administration has given up on controlling the pandemic.
We're going to defeat the virus. We're not going to control it. We will try to contain it as best we can. And if you look at full context of what I was talking about is we need to make sure that we have therapeutics and vaccines.
There are expectations a vaccine could be approved in the U.S. by November or December, but widespread use remains months away.
So the amount of doses that will be available in December will not certainly be enough to vaccinate everybody. You'll have to wait several months into 2021.
And another outbreak has hit the upper levels of the Trump administration. Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff and a handful of other staffers have tested positive for COVID-19. Pence and his wife have so far tested negative. He will continue to travel to campaign events despite concerns he could potentially spread the virus. Ignoring concerns from public health officials, President Trump continues to hold large in-person rallies with little social distancing and few masks. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Bethesda, Maryland.
The African Union has called on member states and the international community to contribute to its Africa COVID-19 Response Fund. AU chairperson and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said the fund has raised only a fraction of what is needed. CGTN's Grum Chala reports.
The African Union, Africa CDC and Afrexim Bank organized the AU COVID-19 Response Fund soon after the outbreak of the pandemic. The fund aims to implement a continental joint strategy to combat the pandemic. Also, it is instrumental to strengthen the African COVID-19 efforts, such as procurement of diagnostics, distribution to member states, and mitigating the pandemic's socio-economic humanitarian impacts on Africans.
This fund best encapsulates Africa's quest for self-reliance and our desire to be architects of our own destiny. With African countries and companies being the first to contribute to the fund, we demonstrated clearly that we as Africans are taking the lead in the role of combating this great tragedy that has befallen our continent.
The fund has raised $44 million, but is looking to secure an additional $300 million.
We need to raise at least a further $300 million to ensure assistance is provided to societies and countries in need, and to enable us to weather the health and economic storm in the weeks and months and years ahead. For us to continue with the prevention efforts and healthcare and case management for our people, the fund has to mobilize additional resources as quickly as possible.
Global bodies like the World Health Organization are supporting the African continent's strategy to combat COVID-19. The WHO has donated $5 million to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
COVID-19 has taken so much from us, but it has also reminded us that health is not a luxury item. It is the foundation of social, economic and political stability. We're all in this together, and with national unity and global solidarity, we will overcome this pandemic together.
COVID-19 cases are rapidly nearing 2 million in Africa, with over 40,000 deaths. Officials at the Africa CDC say now more than ever governments must work together. IMF reports predict that the sub-Saharan African economy will contract by 3.2% this year alone. The World Bank has also fears of economic recessions in the region. This is why the Africa COVID-19 Response Fund becomes highly important to save lives, economies and livelihoods in the continent. Grumtala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The spread of coronavirus in Kenya is adversely affecting cancer patients physically, financially and mentally. Apart from difficulties in accessing healthcare, some cancer patients have had their source of income cut, thereby significantly impacting their medical journey. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia met with Ruth Wanjiku, who has battled a fast-spreading cancer for 6 years now, and here's her story.
I'm Ruth Wanjiku. I'm 23 years old. I'm an online taxi driver. I had a cancer called osteogenic sarcoma. It started when I was only 17 years old. It started just like a little pimple and it made me got amputated. And it spread to other body parts, and I got my one lung removed. Sarira, to the stomach, the lung also. Right now I'm fighting this cancer again in between the stomach, and it's still an osteogenic sarcoma. I'm in a risk of getting COVID-19 because my immunity is low. Whenever you are getting your medicine or your chemotherapy, always your immunity is low and you have to be careful so that you don't get this COVID-19. There was this time that I was in pain and I needed painkillers or more attention from the doctor, because when I was at home, I couldn't get enough care. So I visited a hospital, and it's a big hospital, but there were so many COVID-19 patients. So you cannot be attended to because they are attending to COVID-19 patients, so you have to go and look for another hospital. It's very hard and challenging because every day you are meeting a different person. Every day you can carry up to 10 people and you don't know whether they have COVID-19 or not. You find yourself not going to work because maybe you think you'll get corona whenever you carry them. You have the bills to pay, you have the hospital bills, you have other bills, especially with the health issues. You have to buy medicine, you have to eat well, you have to everything that let me say you have a lot of things that you should do with money, but your source of income is closed. Like you cannot work because you fear the people you're working with, maybe they have corona. Most of the time you don't work because your immunity is low. Most of the time you don't work because you have pain. And this corona thing, I wish it can end like now so that we can go back to work as normal.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news, the European Union backs Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to lead the World Trade Organization. And resumption of international flights promises to boost South Africa's tourism. The European Union is backing former Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to head the World Trade Organization. Iweala and South Korean Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hae are the two finalists to replace Brazilian Roberto Azevedo at the helm of the World Trade Organization. This means that for the first time in its 25-year history, the WTO will be headed by a woman. Reuters quotes an official who says that EU support for Okonjo-Iweala is considered a strong signal to reinforce the multilateral order and a sign of mutual trust between the bloc and Africa. Okonjo-Iweala is 66 years old and previously served as the Nigerian foreign minister. She is an economist and development specialist serving as board chair of Global Vaccine Alliance, Gavi. South Africa's tourism sector is again open to international travelers under level 1 of a phased reopening of the economy. The sector lost over 50% of its value since the COVID-19 lockdown began at the end of March. The borders have been reopened, but not all international travelers will be allowed in if they are from high-risk countries. Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
South Africa's tourism sector has bemoaned the introduction of a high-risk country list. This, they say, is creating uncertainty for agents and international visitors who want to plan their travels months in advance.
We have determined using the WHO criteria what our average level is. And we've then agreed that countries that significantly are above the level of South Africa's infection and death rates, those countries will remain determined by us as high-risk countries.
The World Travel and Tourism Council found that 44% of leisure travelers in South Africa were international tourists in 2018, making the sector highly dependent on this market. Once Africa's largest tourism sector, South Africa is now losing over $18 million daily due to the lack of international tourists.
As much as there are people from domestic leisure travel going around, the country, we still have or still going to have a challenge from the income point of view, since we are discounting our prices. And also the demand, while it's there a little bit, it's not sufficient to sustain the industry going forward. So there is a bit of recovery because we're coming from zero. So, any number, above zero will be, welcome.
Popular international attractions like the Cradle of Humankind here in South Africa's economic hub, Gauteng, are yet to open despite a go-ahead from the government to do so. The UNESCO World Heritage Site will only open once it has a new business model in place.
We are not anticipating that, if we do away with the list, we will get an influx of tourists coming into the country. This is going to be a long recovery. But the list that we need to do is to ensure that the tourists that are sitting, in our source markets overseas, are aware that we're open for business and they can start to make the bookings for the next 3 months to come.
Business travelers, those with critical skills visas, and people on international missions in sports, arts, culture and science are the only people allowed to come to South Africa from high-risk countries. South African tourism is hoping that the government will ease up on that high-risk country list to ensure an influx of visitors as we head into the festive season. But it is highly unlikely as more countries are struggling with the second wave of COVID-19. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The South African coal industry will likely reach a tipping point by 2025. That's when renewable energy is expected to be cheaper, both in terms of capital and operational expenditure compared to existing coal-fired electricity. This means that within the next decade, the South African coal landscape will look completely different. CGTN's Angela Kopler examines the sector.
Medium-term forecasts are concerning, but it's the immediate term that is worrying some coal analysts.
specifically when it comes to the winner of the US elections.
Obviously, if Biden wins, it's bearish for the coal producers in the short term, because he's looking to decarbonize the US economy, which means coal-fired plants will be shut down, which means local US coal-fired producers will initially probably look at dumping their material onto the international market, which will depress the price in the short term. But ultimately, those US coal producers will probably go bankrupt, and then their production will be taken away from the market. So long term, that's probably a bit more bullish for the market going forward.
Meanwhile, Eskom, the biggest consumer of coal in South Africa, is looking to retire some of its older and unreliable coal-fired power stations. It currently buys about 120 million tons of coal per annum, spending roughly $3.5 billion.
We have received commitments and expressions of interest in writing from some of our existing funders who clearly have skin in the game as far as Eskom is concerned. They have a vested interest in ensuring that Eskom succeeds going forward, so they are prepared to offer us concessional funding based on the accelerated introduction of renewable energy, low carbon, no carbon electricity into the grid.
Despite these moves, there's still commercial life left in the South African coal sector.
So I think the prospects are mixed. I think on the export side, we are obviously facing bearish pressures and headwinds. But on the domestic side, we obviously have demand for our lower grade coals for at least until 2050, even perhaps longer. So there, the price could be supported.
Eskom is focusing on a just transition from coal to other energy sources. Part of this process involves interaction with communities that have power stations and associated coal mines nearby.
We've already had one round of negotiations with the affected communities. That first round was a bit rocky, but the second round has been far more positive, as I think the communities are starting to appreciate the fact that there is a future after the power station goes into retirement. So I think that is quite exciting.
Coal miners need to continue responsibly mining coal because it is a great job creator. And of course, countries around the world can't just suddenly stop burning coal. There needs to be a phased transition. But coal miners need to also look at the opportunities around the environment and the just transition.
There are competing forces at work when it comes to coal and producing electricity for developing countries like South Africa. The bottom line is, though, that there has to be a just transition so that everyone benefits. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Chinese app Viskit is proving to be a game changer for many budding entertainers in Kenya. Launched barely 2 years ago, the app gives people a platform to create and share short videos, as CGTN's Robert Nagila found out.
Kenyan comedian Teslin is filming a short skit for her fan base on the digital platform Viskit.
Mommy, I was only joking.
She's been posting content on the platform for just over a year now. The performer is using it to develop a career in comedy.
It has really helped my comedy skills because I'm able to see what other comedians are doing. I borrow some ideas, then I go create mine.
Launched in 2018, the app, owned by Transit Media, is a joint venture between two Chinese tech giants, NetEase and Transsion. The app aims to build the largest video community on the African continent.
Viskit is a short video platform where people post videos, funny videos, for the purpose of entertainment.
Viskit is currently working with more than 500 artists across the continent as brand ambassadors. It targets people between the ages of 18 and 30, translating content into local languages with a subscriber base in the tens of millions.
In Africa, we have over 36 million users and 14 million active users.
For comedian Matata Mwenda, the app has also allowed him to explore another of his passions, photography, and generate some income from it.
I get people asking me how much I charge, how I do it, how can they access me.
All you need is a smartphone, download the app, some content, and you're in business. It's not all about comedy, though. Others, like Candy Christine, use the platform to put out content on makeup, fashion, and art. She says it's helped her self-development.
It's also helping me grow in my personality because, you know, when you're creating content, you're doing role play, you're doing so much, you're even learning on your facial expressions.
The platform has given young Africans an opportunity to showcase their talent, but equally important, access to a wider audience. And who knows, Africa's next big act may already be on this kit. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Economists from across the world are awaiting the release of China's 14th five-year plan this week. For an idea of what's to come, some have been looking to a speech earlier this year by President Xi Jinping. In it, the Chinese leader stressed the importance of keeping the door open to the world. CGTN reporter Marco finds out how this principle is being carried out.
The Chongqing-Xinjiang-Europe International Railway is one of the first and busiest lines on the China Railway Express, a pilot project of the country's Belt and Road Initiative. Since it first opened in 2012, over 10,000 trains have traveled through the Horgos Gateway on the China-Kazakhstan border, connecting customers in China's coastal markets with businesses across Eurasia.
Our business is good. We have a lot of Chinese customers. Some wholesalers have come all the way from Urumqi and Beijing.
Chinese tourists really like our wine. Every day the goods leave quickly and the number of sales is high. We plan to scale up and expand the range of alcoholic beverages.
The trains provide a convenient and relatively cheap mode of transportation, and the gateway has transformed the humble city of Horgos into a success story. It's one of the first tourist destinations in the region to bounce back from COVID-19.
I bought a lot of stuff at duty-free shops. They look authentic and the prices were good.
During the National Holiday Shopping Festival, our daily sales reached 400,000 yuan.
We conduct both online and offline activities, especially online influencers. They have helped create a new economic dynamic for both Chinese and foreign customers and businesses.
Chinese leaders said in July that the country will create a new development pattern with the domestic market as the mainstay. Some have asked if this is a sign China is leaning towards trade protectionism.
The double dynamic of China's economy, namely the stimuli from both outside and within, are a stable system, but relying only on the global market is unsustainable. Every country knows that. What China is doing is switching more of its reliance onto domestic consumers, because the mode of relying on foreign investment and foreign technology is obsolete, especially in the face of COVID-19 and the trade war.
Chinese policymakers are set to release the gist of the 14th five-year plan later this week, providing more details about how the world's second-largest economy plans to adjust its policies to a fast-changing world. Marco, CGTN, Chongqing Municipality.
2020 is the last year of China's 13th five-year plan period, a time during which the country has made significant strides in improving the business climate and attracting foreign investment. Many foreign investors are expecting more improvements to come. Ying Jungyi reports.
Swiss industrial giant ABB Group is one of the foreign companies which have made big investments in China during the last 5 years. With Shanghai's measures to increase financial and tax support and guidance encouraging foreign manufacturer investment, the robotic company found it easy to expand business, recruit professionals, and get through the hard times at the first half of the year. It has even announced the launch of new robotic factories in Shanghai next year, when it expects more business-friendly government policies.
In the past few years, we have seen the launch of more positive regulations and the government focusing more on the development of technology. We are looking forward to more opening up policies in the future. China has the biggest robotics market in the world. With the business climate further improving, we think the market will become even more bigger.
Foreign financial institutions have also benefited substantially from supportive policies during the last 5 years. Since 2018, authorities have given approval to foreign banks and insurers to set up nearly 100 institutions in the country. The new firms are now allowed to form pension investment management companies and to invest in the wealth management subsidiaries of commercial banks in China. Foreign banks, including Citibank, are looking forward to an even more competitive Chinese market, with the improved business climate bringing more foreign players in the next 5-year period.
They're coming to China because they see opportunities in this market. They're coming to China because they believe in the economic growth that is available in China. They're coming to China because they believe in a long-term growth story in this market.
According to the World Bank's latest Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation report on China, the country has been the top performer among large economies for the last 15 years, featuring significant business reforms, streamlined legislation, and easier tax burdens. China's overall ranking in World Bank's report on ease of doing business last year was 31st among 190 world economies. Ying Junyi, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
And coming up in sports, South Sudan looking to reopen Juba National Stadium after minor collapse.